All right, well today this is the last in the series of three, and I'm going to be looking in detail at the extraordinary phenomenon of the Ballets Russes, this sort of explosion of creative energy that brings together all of the fields of the arts for about 20 years between 1909 and 1929. And it is going to have a surprising effect on the development of women's fashions. So this is how I'm really connecting this extraordinary story with the discourse that we've had in the first two lectures. Now, to situate it again, remember we were speaking about how in the 19th century you get the development of two spheres, this idea of men being in the public sphere and women in the private sphere. Women, particularly the bourgeoisie, as being typecast as being feeble and weak, and whose role primarily is to be that of a mother, the person who will develop the next generation of the bourgeoisie, who are now the dominant class in society, but also to be the person who shows the wealth of her husband and the status of her husband. So the clothes of these women related very much to this idea of, women as pure, as untouchable, but extremely feminine. So this is where we spoke at length about the crinoline, which of course accentuates the breasts, the waist, and the hips, but at the same time constrains women and forces them into this sort of upright position, right? In other words, which is a kind of a symbol of their virtue and their uprightness. Now, it is surprising that you actually see this attitude towards women as virtuous, ethereal, pure, morally superior to men. I'm sorry, we actually have a man in the audience today, so I will be very, correct. But this idea that women were sort of, particularly a respectable woman, was very far from a sensual woman, very far from sexuality. And in fact, there was this cult of invalidism at the time, that the closer to death, the weaker you were, the less you were sort of sensual, and the purer you were. And in fact, during the Romantic movement, from 1800 to about 1840, the heroines of the novels are women who become eternally desirable because they remove themselves from the normal sphere of life. In other words, they die or enter convents or become mentally unstable. And the idea of women as sort of sylph-like creatures, closer to heaven but close to death, who return only momentarily and only just touch this reality, is echoed in the ballets of the time. And I want you to look here for a moment at Les Sylphides. If you think of the ballets that are produced in the 19th century, Les Sylphides, remember these creatures, otherworldly creature who comes to haunt her lover, and it is to be able to dance these ethereal creatures. For the first time, you have the great prima ballerina Maria Taglioni working on her points, right? So this, and shortening her dresses so that you could see her footwork. So these women in diaphanous clothes with dainty, unreal, constrained footsteps epitomise in many ways this other aspect of women. Look at the other ballet of the time, Giselle. Giselle, of course, is a willy, one of these sort of who dies of a broken heart but returns to protect her true love. But then, of course, at dawn goes back again, just as a virtuous woman should. But anyhow, this idea of belonging to another world. And I don't need, of course, to talk about Swan Lake, a woman as a swan, as a bird, as an unreal creature. However, if you actually look at the way, in the direction in which the ballet costumes had evolved, they'd evolved more or less the same way as the crinolines. By now, people had extremely corseted tutus. The tutu had become shorter, again to emphasise the leg movements and the foot movements. All of this will change after this extraordinary explosion of creativity, it will be the Ballets Russes. So I want to now talk in particular about the person who brought the Ballets Russes into being, Serge Diaghilev. Now, Serge himself said that he was an absolute failure as a writer, a failure as an artist, and a failure as a musician. In fact, no one less than Rimsky-Korsakov had told him he had absolutely no talent whatsoever. However, he did have something that was very important, and that was he knew himself. He had great self-belief. And he actually sort of says, I'm a charmer, all right? I'm a cheat, I'm a charlatan, and one thing is sure, I have absolutely no talent whatsoever. However, I have found my vocation in life, and that is to be an impresario, to be a patron of the arts. And indeed, for 20 years, he will be the person who develops this disparate group of artists, such as Picasso, Matisse, Chirico, Rouault, I could go on, the great dancers of the 19th and 20th century, Anna Pavlova and Václav Nijinsky, who we will be talking about in detail, the great choreographer Georges Balanchine, whose works are still being produced throughout the world, the cutting edge in music, Igor Stravinsky, Claude Debussy, Eric Satie, Sergei Prokofiev. Now, he brought all of these geniuses in many ways together, and what he formed from their collaboration went beyond the individual talents of each of them. To form this ballet company that would astound and enchant the world for more than 20 years, right? He would travel throughout the world and even influence the development of the Borovansky ballet that you have here in Australia. Ballet would not exist in the form it does if it hadn't been for Diaghilev. I just want to have a look at, I've actually have some video clips that are incorporated into this, and we're sort of going to see the way in which in art, music, dance and all other forms he is going to bring together this synergy of energy. Well, who was he? He was born in 1872 in a small Russian town, and his mother died very soon after his birth, and his father remarried, and he was very fortunate in that he absolutely adored his stepmother, who was a woman who was very interested in the arts, and who in her salon used to bring together writers and artists of the time. And in fact, the Diaghilev household was known at the time as being a sort of the Athens of the area near St. Petersburg. Now, his father at this time, of course, we're looking at Tsarist Russia, extraordinary nepotism, corruption, and this was a time when his father had a monopoly of vodka. And was immensely rich. So the family could travel to France, to Paris, and they also had an apartment in St. Petersburg. Serge enrolled in law, but as events began to unfold in Russia, and we'll see this in a minute, his father lost the monopoly. Things began to be more democratized. There were market forces involved. His father became bankrupt, and so Serge had to live on a bequest from his mother. So he sort of was living a slightly bohemian life in St. Petersburg, but at that time, St. Petersburg was a very lively cultural spot. First of all, he was there as a student when Prince Igor, Borodin's Prince Igor, was premiered, and when Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty was premiered. So at an absolutely seminal time for ballet. So this is what is going to give him this idea of transporting these ballets to Paris. Now he enrolled in the conservatory, but it got absolutely nowhere. Now while he was there, he linked up with a group of young people who called themselves the Nevsky Pickwickians, and who came together to create a journal called The World of Art. In fact, that's what the English is. I have no idea what the Russian is, which only lasted about 6 years. But it was an extremely vibrant vehicle for putting before the Russian, cultural elite the work of the Impressionist and the Neo-Impressionist painters. And he is going to try and work with this journal to put forward the importance of Russian folk tales and so on. And this, in fact, is what this woodcut is. It's sort of derived from Russian art. Now, he's going to collaborate with several people there. There will be Baxt and Benoit, two people who will constantly remain with him when he needs people for developing sets and designs with the Ballets Russes. So this is the sort of art that he was trying to put forward in Russia. Now, the Tsar, he was given the patronage of the Tsar. He managed to sort of already sell himself. He had an extraordinary sort of gift for self-advertisement. People sort of said he was charming but as slippery as a snake, and that he could charm a corpse. But he managed to get himself into the imperial subsidies and put on an enormous show of Russian portraits. And so from then on he will be assured for a while of the patronage of the Tsar. So what happens at this time is, this is the Tsar of Russia, is in 1904, Russia enters into a disastrous war with Japan. The Russian fleet is scuttled, sunk. It's a dreadful defeat for Russia, and it shows up the nepotism, the corruption, the outdated infrastructure that exists in Russia at the time. And it's very interesting. If Diaghilev had perhaps lived at any other time, he would not have been able to do what he did. There's this sort of confluence of political activity, social activity, and extraordinary artistic activity as well that is all happening at the same time. So because of these problems that the Tsar had, the Tsar becomes bankrupt, the Tsar needs the support of the French. And so he turns to Diaghilev to put on an exhibition in Paris of, I think it's the portraits of Russian portraits throughout the centuries, which Diaghilev does, and at the Autumn Salon of 1906. And of course this was the event of the year. We spoke before about the importance of the Salon. Millions of people attended it. And it was this Russian, this rubbing with the extraordinary legends and so on of Russia was very, very successful with the French public. Now the French public at this time were interested in exotic work. They were interested in, of course, Gauguin's work. The post-impressionists interested in Theodore Rousseau's work as well. And they saw this Russian art as being opening up a new frontier, so as to speak. So he then has the idea of putting on a concert an opera at the Palais Garnier. And he puts on Boris Godunov with the great Russian bass singer Fyodor Chaplin, who absolutely rivets the French audience. They are amazed at the sort of force of this other culture. Now, Boris Godunov, of course, foregrounds Russia of I think Boris Godunov was the last Tatar Russian Tsar. So it's a story of intrigue and violence in sort of medieval Russia. And the Russian costume is designed by Baxt, right? And again, it is something that the French have never seen before. And of course, French at the time. It was the cultural centre of Europe. Paris was the cultural centre of Europe. So here you have this costume, very exotic style, but also these amazing textiles that were used. There's sort of satins and silks, brocaded with pearls and artificial jewels, with fur hats and referring back to medieval times. So it was absolutely acclaimed, and Diaghilev then has the very good idea of working with these ideas of Russian folk tales. So he sees himself as someone who is sort of going to spearhead a kind of Russian revival, right? And it's quite interesting because when you look at what he does with the Ballets Russes, it's always looking back to an old Russia. He will never actually have ballets or anything that refer to Russia after the communist regime comes to power. So the Tsar has already had great sort of problems, and there's a bloody uprising in 1905 where workers are shot down, there are strikes, and the Imperial Ballet, which has something like 400 people in it, many of these people go on strike. So there's a sense of restlessness, that something, that there needs to be a new beginning for the Russian arts. And Diaghilev is the man who is there at this time. And he sort of draws this energy in and then will sort of create from it. So he has the genial idea of bringing to Paris dancers who are on their summer break from the Imperial Ballet. And at least 70 of these Russian dancers will come out with him, and he has the idea of putting on a short ballet because, of course, he's not going to have very much time for rehearsals and so on. And so these incredibly disciplined, hard-working Russians, I mean, it's very similar now. If you look at the Russians, they dominate gymnastics, they dominate tennis, women's tennis. It's this idea of rigour, of discipline. And here we have Diaghilev and part of the troupe coming out for this premiere in Paris. Now with them would come Anna Pavlova. Now Anna Pavlova was the prima ballerina with the Imperial Russian Ballet, but she was very dissatisfied with not just the structure of the ballet, but the choreography at the time. She thought it was very stilted. It was not cliched, but it left too little room for innovation and inspiration. And she actually says, I draw a veil of poetry over my dance, and I borrow from the rich chromatic scale of choreography. So she wanted something different. And with her would come the probably greatest dancer of the 20th century. This is Václav Nijinsky, who is considered to be even more important than Rudolf Nureyev. Nureyev will, of course, be inspired and will try and be the new Nijinsky. Now, his sister, Bronislava Nijinsky, will also come. She will be a prima ballerina. Nijinsky and his sister will end up as choreographers, as we'll see, for Diaghilev. I don't know what happened to the third person. He didn't enter ballet. He probably had a normal life. We also have the other prima ballerina at the time, was Tamara Karsavina, an extraordinary woman who was the great rival of Pavlova, and in many ways, if not as technically perfect as Pavlova, was a much more expressive dancer and was much more open to the new style of choreography and dancing to the new types of music than Pavlova would be. Pavlova always remains with the classical, laissez-faire and so on. And also, out of this troupe will come Mikhail Fokin, who also will be one of the great choreographers. Now, these people are going to be responsible at the death of Diaghilev for the dissemination of ballets throughout the world. Most of the large ballets in America, in England, in Australia, all come from the Ballets Russes of Diaghilev. Now, Fokin, who we're looking at there, was very dissatisfied with ballet, and this is a time, of course, in art where you've got naturalism, you've got impressionism, and he's sort of saying, well, why in ballet do we still have to have these stories about princes and princesses and you know, dying sylphs? Why can't we have ballets that reflect normal, you know, contemporary society and reflect a normal human body and its movements rather than these really rather obscure sort of ballet steps? He also was really concerned about the role of male dancers. He saw them just simply as props, you know, standing there and doing a little sort of few hand movements, but basically just twirling the ballerina around. He sort of thought that the men should actually have some real part in the ballet. He also wanted to work with the bodies of the ballerinas much more than just with the footwork, right? Because at ballet at the time was foregrounded extraordinary point work. And the last thing that he wanted to look at also was to break away from the extraordinary sort of geometry of the choreography, where you have sort of, you know, people in pairs always moving simultaneously and so on. He wanted to get away from all of these things, and in fact what he creates will be the Ballets Russes. He will create these ballets which are going to astound people for the next 20 years. Now, he also was aware of two American women, Louise Fuller, who originally was Louise Fuller, and or Louise Fuller, probably, or Alois, and Isadora Duncan. At least she had an exotic name. Now, Louise Fuller had started out as a dancer in vaudeville, which I think is really quite interesting. So she didn't come from the classical tradition. She'd learnt ballet. She had appeared in some ballets, but was already wanting to make dance an expressive medium, rather than something which obeys extremely rigid rules. And so she is not appreciated very much in America, and comes to Paris and becomes one of the dancers at the Folies Bergère, which is where you see her in this poster, and enters that sort of bohemian world of Montmartre. She's very friendly with Chéret, with Toulouse-Lautrec, all of those people who were on the cutting edge of art. And she develops a dance called the Serpentine dance, where it's not just a matter of high kicks, but she swirls material which have different coloured gels on them, and the lights, the electricity lights coming through them, change these gels to different colours. So she dances like a butterfly in these swirling kaleidoscopes of colours with beautifully graceful movements, which are not choreographed, right? She dances according to the way in which she feels at the time. So this was an extremely revolutionary move. She also became very interested in chemistry as well, and ended up belonging to the Chemistry Academy in Paris. When she actually went on tour, this is the way in which she danced. She became an icon of Art Nouveau. You know, this idea of the femme fatale. With there's actually statues that you can get of her, and some of Tiffany also had done some beautiful glass work of these sort of eternally desirable sort of swirling woman. So she's not far from, if you look at the sort of diaphanous materials, from those original dances that we saw. But here you have much more expression of a real body and a real person. Now, she actually also championed another person who was Isadora Duncan, who lived a remarkable life between extraordinary sort of marriages, and then when married people who were a lot older when she was young, and then people who were a lot younger when she was older. Managed to have she was bisexual, and in fact the sexuality of practically everyone that I speak about, with probably the exception of Picasso, who sort of made up for it in aggressive heterosexuality, were gay or bisexual, and which meant that, which actually facilitated these extraordinary links between different areas of society. Anyhow, well, Isadora Duncan also had quite a tragic life, as you know. Her two children by Paris Singer, the son of one of the Singer sewing machine company were out with their nanny, and the nanny, the pram went down the hill and into the water, and the two children were drowned. And of course, as you know, she dies as she had lived. She was a sort of fading star with a scarf around her neck, and she's whizzing off with a toy boy from in front of the Negresco, and the scarf turns around the axle of the wheel and not exactly decapitates her, but her neck is snapped. It's probably, she died as she'd lived. But what she'd actually achieved was something different from Louis Fuller, in the sense that she didn't use the diaphanous swirling so much, but used different postures, and she relating to graceful movements of like the Greek and Roman style. She used to incorporate all sorts of different steps, such as skipping and hopping, and danced barefoot. So it was very, very different. And she had a philosophy of dance which she wanted to express, and she spent a lot of time building up schools, going around schools teaching girls to dance. Now, I don't know if any of you know Emma Hamilton. Do you know who was Lord Nelson's sidekick? And she actually started off this idea of these expressive poses, where he would run around with a light. In fact, the man she was married to would run with a lantern, and she'd take up a pose, like Dido, regretting the departure of Aeneas, and so on. And these attitudes, they were called, that's right. And people on the Grand Tour would come all the way to Naples, so they'd tick that off on their Grand Tour program. Yes, I've seen Emma Hamilton's attitudes. Well, this is not dissimilar from that. Now, actually, the first movie makers, the Lumiere brothers, actually did a film clip of one of the dances in Louis Fuller's style, which you can see here. This is not Louis Fuller, but this is how she danced. I think that this would have probably been coloured later, but do you see the way in which those colours are probably? This is Isadora Duncan in her heyday, going through a few of her moves, which don't look extraordinarily exciting, but anyway. So this is this breakaway, and is going to influence Fokine. So Diaghilev then, with Fokine as his choreographer, puts on the first ballet Russe, and he chooses a tale from Russian folk tales, Russian history, about these Polovskian peasants in sort of deeper Russia, all right, and the story of intrigue and lust and violence, all of which went down very well with the French audiences. But what astounded people were these dances, which were like the Cossacks, right? Cossack-style male dancing. So you get incredible energy, vitality, and movements that are ungraceful, but which entrance the audiences by their power of their physicality and their expressiveness. And secondly, you get a complete break with ballet costumes. All right, now you've seen what you would have had if you'd gone to see Giselle or Les Sylphides. Now you have these extraordinary costumes by Roerich, who was one of those collaborators with that journal, World of Art. So he has actually gone to the marketplaces of St. Petersburg and bought the fabrics which were on sale there. And so you get these extraordinary colours. You get silks and satins with really outrageous stripes and lozenges, colours that almost seem to clash, but which would seem normal probably on a Fauvist canvas, but certainly not something that you would have expected to see at the ballet, right? With white ethereal tutus. So the French audiences at this time, the Parisian audiences, were a sophisticated audience, ready to accept difference. Perhaps if this had been done anywhere else, he wouldn't have had the same success. So with the success from this, he was going to continue on. Now, by now, of course, the Russian Revolution will have taken place, and the Tsar no longer can sponsor Diaghilev, and so he has to turn to Parisian art circles for patronage. And in fact, one of the hallmarks of Diaghilev's career is that he really lives on a shoestring budget, and he just has enough money to get every performance going. And in fact, you have stories of the costumes, were paid for by Monsieur just at the last minute, and he basically, the seamstress getting them to the dancers' loge something like 20 minutes before they're to go on. It was real brinksmanship. It was never sure whether it was all going to pull together at the time. Everyone worked incredibly hard. Now, Monsieur Satie was a major patron of the arts in fin de siècle Paris. She'd married often and well, and she'd come out of a family. I think she was Polish. Her mother had died in childbirth, and she'd been sent to live she was brought up in a convent, where the only thing that sort of made her life worth living were her piano lessons. So she becomes quite an accomplished pianist. And in fact, this convent background is one of the things that she will have in common with Coco Chanel. And in fact, they are very, very close friends. These two women who are sort of ferocious personalities really appreciated each other. Now, she marries her cousin, Natterson. I don't know if you've heard of him, who will be the person who develops the La Revue Blanche, which will publish the poems of Mallarmé, publish the poems of the avant-garde literary field. However, he goes broke, and he can only be pulled out of his financial debts by a man who owns a newspaper, Le Matin, and the owner of the newspaper says, "I'll take you out of debt if you give me your wife." So he says, "Well, okay." I think Adamson becomes her second husband, and she becomes immensely wealthy, becomes then a patron of the arts as well. She has Toulouse-Lautrec mixing her cocktails at her dinner parties and so on. And finally, in her third marriage, she marries a painter, José Sert, and it is then, for the last at least about 50 years, she is going to be at the centre of all of art and literature and culture in Paris. Now, practically every musician and artist was either in love with her or was under her patronage. People dedicated works to her. She evidently had extraordinary charm. This is a painting of her. She also was bisexual. She lived in a kind of ménage à trois with her third husband, all of whom were completely unfaithful to her. People spent an awful lot of time being unfaithful. I don't know how they actually spent so much time being creative, really. It must have been exhausting, Anyway, so I think this is very interesting, the way in which, how she's been Renoired. All of Renoir's people look exactly the same, and they lose their character and their individuality. Now, the other person, this is Monsieur. You'll see portraits of her by Toulouse-Lautrec, Renoir, all of the great painters of the time. This is her on the front page of La Revue Blanche. Now, another person who will step up to bankroll the Ballets Russes is Winneretta Singer, who is, I think, one of the 14 children of the Isaac Singer sewing machine family. We've already met her brother, Paris Singer. She comes to Paris and is married off to someone in the aristocracy, but because she's actually gay, she's not bisexual, she's gay. And of course this is horrendous for her, so she spends her wedding night on top of a cupboard with a gun, telling him that if he comes anywhere near her, she will blast his brains out. So that marriage did not last very long. However, 3 years later, she marries the Prince de Polignac, who is also gay. Immensely wealthy, but they form a very harmonious couple, and the two of them will be great benefactors and patrons of the arts in all fields. In fact, they set up foundations to help struggling artists. I think she looks amazing with this jacket. I'd love one of those. Anyway. All right, so with this, backed by these powerful financial people, Diaghilev goes forward and was going to put on his ballet, this ballet the first time that he is actually going to work with Rimsky-Korsakov. Now, he is always out to shock just a little bit. He likes a little bit of scandale, you know, and he certainly gets it with this ballet Scheherazade, which is, of course, set in a harem, which is scandalous enough, I suppose, but we have sort of rather, you know, scarcely veiled carryings on, great sort of sensuality in the movements, and also scenes of sort of rather overt sexuality between a black slave and a white slave, and so this was what people found also rather challenging. But what is going to be amazing is the departure of the costumes for the main female dancers, which become these extraordinary diaphanous harem pants. Now, you have to remember that basically this choreography that you're going to get from Fokine and later on from Balanchine are the basis of practically all of the ballets in the world that you have now, right? This choreography will be mined and mined and mined for new productions, and these costumes that were produced are kept like treasures in museums. We have some in the National Gallery in Canberra, the Victoria and Albert, there's some in Washington. They're considered jewels, really, of art. So here we have Scheherazade. Now this is a little bit dark, but this is the Ballet Russe of Monte Carlo. Can you see these extraordinary sort of lascivious movements as opposed to the pas de deux of two dying swans? All right, now this is the backdrop, which calls on, you know, the taste for Orientalism, and here we have this sort of scene which was considered so sort of sensual, with these two people writhing on the stage. I mean, we are a long way from Pavlova. So here we have these sensuous costumes, and this was actually Fokine's wife, Vera. Now, what these costumes had done had been to liberate the central part of the female body, which had been held very, very stiff by the corset. So women, or at least the dancers now, could, like the male dancers, move their body expressively, undulate all the middle part, and so express with their entire body emotions and ideas as well, rather than just being kept to a very constraining choreography, which was also constraining costumes. Now, this was a success, an extraordinary success. People went wild for Scheherazade costumes, and the great designer of the day, Paul Poiret, designs his latest fashions, which are sold, you know, on the catwalk and then copied in the Grand Magasin. So in the 1910, 1915, you're going to get these free-flowing costumes, and particularly the turbans are going to come into fashion as well. People had Scheherazade parties, you know, with long cigarette holders, and you have pictures of all the fashionable ladies of the day lounging around in harem pants, and so on. Now, what was really important about Scheherazade, apart from the fashion, was the debut, I suppose, of Vasiliev Nijinsky as a lead dancer. Now, here he is in his Scheherazade costume. He had been noticed, in fact, he'd risen to acclaim in the Imperial Ballet when he was very young, about 14, and had been taken on almost immediately as not a lead dancer, but in sort of secondary roles because he was very young. And he was spotted when he was extremely young by Diaghilev, who takes him as his lover and is extraordinarily protective of him and possessive as well, which we'll talk about later. Now, what was interesting about Nijinsky was that he had a very different body from the kind of body that the lead male dancers had. When you think of, or even Nureyev, I suppose, you know, with very long limbs, long legs, long arms, probably small head, lithe, whereas Nijinsky was 5'4", right, who was a very short man. He had a long, thick neck. He had a long torso and very thick thighs. So in other words, in fact, his thighs were so thick he had to have all his suits tailored specially for him because he couldn't fit into normal clothes. So this was a body which was made for modern dancing, right? It was not the classical body. He had strength and energy, and this is what people used to be amazed when they saw him. I think Charles Chaplin said of him, you know, I've seen geniuses, but I've never seen anyone like Nijinsky. I think he said he's godlike. His somberness reflects other worlds with his every movement, and every movement is poetry. So he reinvents the role of the male dancer with extraordinary leaps and energy, sort of visceral energy, which electrifies people when they see him. They're just quite amazing. He's extraordinarily charismatic on stage. He also will become a choreographer, as we'll see, and invent a new type of choreography. However, what happens with him is that when Charlie Chaplin sees him, he thinks he's extraordinary on stage, but then Chaplin invites him onto the set of one of the films that he's doing, and he says, this man is a man with an empty face and sad eyes. He's like a sort of a saint or a monk in civilian clothes. So in other words, he could only really express himself through dance. And he led a rather troubled life. He went off while Diaghilev was in Paris. For one reason or another, he went off to tour South America with the troupe and was pursued uphill and down dale by a Russian dancer, Romulo, I can't think of her surname, who was absolutely determined to marry him. Sort of all the tricks of the trade. Managed to get sort of rooms next to his, managed to sort of, you know, bribe her way to be on the same part of the first class train, and happens to be sitting where he'd sit and so on, and finally persuades him, because he wasn't a very strong character, to marry her. And in fact, they don't even speak the same language. He speaks Russian and she speaks something else, and so Czech, I think it was. And so they have to get a translator, and he proposes to her. They get married in Buenos Aires, and everyone is utterly stunned because, of course, he's been gay all his life, and Diaghilev takes it very badly. He feels utterly betrayed and shocked, and not only will he expel Nijinsky from the troupe, but he won't ever let him work again as a dancer, and tries to cancel out his choreography. So we'll come back to Nijinsky later. Here we have Nijinsky in the role of the Blue God. I won't talk about this ballet, but already you're going to be seeing these extraordinary geometrical movements that he's going to introduce. All right, now the costumes are amazing. You see, the thing about the Ballets Russes is that the music can stand by itself, the costumes can stand by itself, the sets are works of art. Then you have the extraordinary dancing, which can stand by itself, but together they form something amazing. So here we have the extraordinary costume, which is actually in the Canberra archives. So here you can see exactly how thick his thighs are here. Now, Nijinsky, Diaghilev is wanting all the time to foreground new Russian ballets, but always mining the past of Russian folk tales. And this time he works with Igor Stravinsky, whom he's actually heard performing. Simply by chance, he happened to be in the audience of a concert and was amazed and thought that Stravinsky could, with him, create something new. So this will be the first of their collaboration, which will produce some extraordinary ballets. So you're now getting the work by Benoit, remember, who was the designer from that review. You've got Fouquin, the great choreographer. You've got Bax, who also does the sets, Stravinsky, and of course the great dancers as well with Nijinsky. Yes. So the story of the Firebird. Have many of you seen the Firebird? These are very short ballets, which is a story of a mystical bird which gives a feather to the main character, and with this feather and with her knowledge, he's able to kill these creatures which are inhabiting his life and preventing him from marrying the princess that he wants to. So here we have this extraordinary ballet, and I'll just sort of show you these movements here. There's wonderful costumes. There she has the feather. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the music on at the same time. Now here we have the demon who is going to be killed by the power of the bird, the fire bird. Now, Stravinsky is going to, with this ballet, turn his back on the romantic tradition of French music. He works on this idea that Russian music has evolved out of, sort of the Eastern sort of Slavic traditions, as well as Western music as well. And so he's going to change the sort of rhythms, add different instruments into the orchestra, and break away from smooth melodic lines. These are the costumes. The next ballet, which will also be with the score also from Stravinsky, is Petrushka. And this will be probably one of the sort of the highlights of the career of Nijinsky. He's remembered for this role. Now, what Fokine is trying to do, remember we spoke about what he was trying to do with ballet. He wants now ballet to represent contemporary society, even if it's, so they go a little bit further back, and he recreates the 1830s costumes in Russia. Of course, it's again, you know, the eternal Russia, not Russia of the communist regime. And he places the action in a Shrovetide fair, where we'll see a clip of the Russians, you know, dancing in this festival. But the story is about three puppets. Now, Petrushka, the word Petrushka actually means a kind of Punch and Judy puppet. That's what it was, and this was entertainment at the time. And the story is a kind of love triangle between the ballerina, who dances the entire ballet on her points, the Moor, and this Petrushka, who is a rather sad character, who's sort of stuffed, you know, a character who's stuffed with straw. So, of course, you can see how far now you've come from the elegance and gracefulness of classical ballet. You know, the movements now are slack, they're sort of turned in, sort of more or less like an automaton. So the main character here will be danced by Tamara Kasaneva, whom you saw before. Anna Pavlova also was supposed to dance this, and she couldn't abide the music of Stravinsky, and so this is one of the reasons why you get Tamara Kasaneva as the main character. Now I just want to show you an extract from the scenes which bring the vibrancy of everyday life in the Russian square to life. All right, and now we have Rudolf Nureyev dancing the part of Petrushka. Now you see these extraordinarily ungainly, unharmonious movements that he has to perfect. All right, so he's no longer, you know, afraid of being ungainly. And here you have Fokine, Nijinsky in the role. Now, Nijinsky brought much more to this role than just technical ability and energy. He was also a great mime. And this was his, you can sort of see this here, he has extraordinarily expressive face, expressive body movements. And in fact, at his death, on his grave, there will be the statue of the tragic puppet Petrushka. Now, while we're speaking about Nijinsky, I will just finish what happens to him in his life. He will end up trying to create his own tour group with, when he goes to America, but he cracks basically under the strain of having to dance design the choreography and run it as well, and begins to fall into mental illness. He'd always been evidently schizophrenic, and finally will be able, less and less capable of maintaining a role, and ends up in a number of institutions and will die there. Before he does, he is finally welcomed back by Diaghilev, who is having trouble finding a choreographer, but this is a very minor side. All right, so here we have Nijinsky with Stravinsky. When you think that he's only 5'4", you realise that Stravinsky was also a very diminutive character. Now we have another of the great roles that Nijinsky dances, and this is in The Afternoon of a Faun. Now I'm sure many of you know this ballet. All of these, remember, are very short ballets, right? They don't spin a great story. It's all about the creativity and expressiveness of this synergy of artists. So here we have the main dancer. This is an extraordinary bringing together of people, with Nijinsky as the main dancer. Bakst, again, the designer, these extraordinary flowing sort of Art Nouveau designs, with Debussy as the composer, and it's from a poem by Mallarmé. Mallarmé, the great 19th century symbolist poet. So all of these are brought together by Diaghilev. Now, it is the story of a lecherous faun who's playing his pipes, and of course you know the music of Debussy, this sort of haunting flute music that's melodic, but sort of you can sort of sing along with it. It's something which is sort of escapes you. So here we have the faun, and look at first of all the movements. Now this was, I'll talk about the movements in a minute. This was considered absolutely scandalous because, of course, he gets nowhere with the faun, with the nymphs, and so he gets a scarf and sort of makes do with the scarf. And so this, I'll keep that away, keep from your tender eyes. But this, of course, was considered scandalous. Now, you will have seen there in the movements, this is the first ballet which is going to mark Nijinsky as a choreographer. And he is inspired by the geometric figures on these vases in the Louvre, all right, the red figure vases and the black figure vases. And you would have seen the way in which he was moving, sort of in a way almost frieze-like across the stage, almost like an Egyptian figure. So what he was, this is with the Après-midi d'une Faune, it's sort of the end of virtuoso dancing, you know, with people twirling and swirling and jumping. It's all of these movements are incredibly confined, constrained and controlled. They're inward movements. The inward movements of the body reflect in the internal feelings of the character. And what Nijinsky is trying to do is to give this sort of intensity. Now, he instructed the dancers in every minute movement. You know, he told them exactly where to look, how their hands were to be held, the movements of the hands, even the movements of their cheeks, their eyes had to be perfectly done. And there was no more graceful movements of hopping like a prince. You were supposed to move slowly downwards like a goat, he actually says, flat-footed like a goat. You're not supposed to be prancing. It's all flat-footed and geometric movements. Now you can see this here in this still of this movement here, and particularly in this video clip. Now, he also uses very expressive facial gestures as well. This is Nureyev, by the way, dancing this. He's considerably taller than Nijinsky. Now, if you watch this idea of the way in which she doesn't hop down, she falls down in a kind of geometric movement. Her arms are all at right angles. If you notice the angles, there's no gentle, rounded natures of anything. Everything is linear. All right. It's the choreography is really stunning. Here we have the costumes, which again refer back to sort of it's a nymph, you know, so therefore it's a kind of Greek costumes. But evidently people raved about Nijinsky. They said he's like a butterfly, but he's not sort of, you know, effeminate. He's the epitome of youthful grace and beauty. Now, this was Charlie Chaplin, who saw Nijinsky dance in the Après-midi d'un Faun, was so taken by it that he actually takes it off in his film Sunnyside. And so here you have the faun, who's Charlie Chaplin, and here you've got the nymphs who are running away. And of course, as you know, he's trying to sort of court them here with his flowers, and of course he ends up sitting on a cactus and all the rest of that, all that sort of thing. But it's interesting how the Ballets Russes had penetrated even comedy films in Hollywood. Beautiful posters which are produced as well. Now, the next ballet, which was really, if you hadn't already noticed Diaghilev as a great impresario, you certainly would have after the Rite of Spring. Now, he has now asked Stravinsky to work again on ancient folk tales of, you know, tyranny and betrayal from the Russian steppes. And he's going to use these extraordinary costumes as well. Now, the Rite of Spring is sort of a very unballetic topic. It's a group of people who actually, peasants who decide that the only way in which they can propitiate the gods is by choosing a girl who is as a sacrifice, and she will dance herself to death. Now, it's a very short ballet. And it was put on after Les Sylphides, all right? So there was a short thing of a ballerina dancing Les Sylphides, and then suddenly the next item on the agenda is the Rite of Spring, and it caused an absolute commotion. Now, why? First of all, we have Stravinsky. I haven't time to go in for his rather complicated love life as well. I just want you to look at this clip of the dancing. Now, you would all know the Stravinsky score, do you not? This da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, absolute basic sort of rhythms. And the dancers here are contorting themselves in the most unlikely movements, ungraceful movements. Now, Diaghilev it was immensely expensive, all right, and it was a real, was wagering a lot on the success of this ballet. He had the largest orchestra that had ever been put together for a ballet. He had a huge number of dancers. And what Stravinsky had done was to use unusual instruments with dissonance rather than harmony, right? And he uses unusual instruments such as tenor tubas and large double basses and alto flutes, very, very strange instruments that give, you always have the impression that the note you're expecting doesn't come. And it really, no one could actually get their head around the music. However, if you actually take away the dissonances from the score, they are fundamental Russian folk music melodies that Stravinsky is working with. Now, Stravinsky had these extraordinary costumes also had been woven specially for the dance. And again, they're costumes from the Russian steppes, and to make sure that they were as ungraceful as possible in the sense of the old ballet terms, they're heavy woolen ones. There's heavy weft of them so that they also pull down, so that you get everything sort of falling towards the earth rather than going away. Now, he had packed the audience with different groups of people who had different opinions about art and music, so he knew that there would be controversy. However, all of the, the who's who of Paris and of Europe really had come to see this premiere. And as soon as the first dissonant chords of Stravinsky strike out, people start murmuring, and in the end people start yelling, people are throwing things. In the end, 40 people are arrested, the police come in, you cannot hear the orchestra over the screams of people who were for and those who were against. You have Nijinsky from the eaves, what is it, the wings, yelling, the cadence to the dancers, because that's, they couldn't hear the music. He's, clapping and conducting. So it was a real sort of succès de scandale in many ways. Here we have the thing. Oh, just before. Well, I'll show you another extract, and then we'll continue talking. Here we have these Russian costumes and unusual hats. So here you have the dancers about trying to come to a decision about who are they going to sacrifice the girl. Now, can you see the ungainly, contorted movements? They look like sort of prehistoric automatons. So this was very difficult for the dancers. In fact, probably French dancers would have refused to perform this. It's all, your feet go inwards rather than outwards. You go in anti-clockwise and clockwise. Very, very difficult to actually to dance. Now Debussy sees this and sort of says, Diaghilev is a genius and Nijinsky is a prophet. Now this is a report in the New York Times. Parisians hiss the new ballet. Russian dancers' latest offer at the Consecration of Spring a failure, have to turn up the lights. Manager of the theatre takes this means to stop hostile demonstrations as the dance goes on. It's a bit like sort of Collingwood against Essendon, isn't it? But a bit of a different crowd. But anyway, what Diaghilev is trying to do in many ways is recreate that extraordinary scandal that took place when Victor Hugo, about 80 years before, had put on Hernani, and you'd have rival groups in the audience for romantic theatre and for classical theatre fighting in the pits, while the poor actors tried to continue. So he was really trying to have that. He liked the scandale, but this probably went a bit far. He also, Patron constantly uses this reference to old Russia. And when the Rite of Spring is revived with a slightly different choreography, 20 years later, he has a Russian artist to create this beautiful curtain, which again refers to the exotic nature of the onion domes and the idea of Tsarist Russia. Now, he was a tireless promoter of all things Russian and realised that the Russianness of the Ballets Russes was what really pulled it together and attracted the public. And so when he found great talent amongst ballerinas and they weren't Russian, he just gives them a Russian name. So you get Lillian Marks, who debuts as Alicia Markova, and then you get, I even like better, is you get Hilda Mungus, who becomes Lydia Sarakova. All right, so well, it's probably better than whatever, Hilda, anyhow. All right, so by now, in 1914, you get the outbreak of the war, and so he will never go back to Russia. In fact, the Ballet Russe remains now very much in the western part of Europe. Now, Fokine, because he has now fallen out with Nijinsky, he takes on another lead dancer as his lover, and so Léonard Massine, who will go on to be a great choreographer with the Ballets Russes de Monte Carlo, is at the same time his lover, lead dancer and choreographer, which is quite an exhausting trio, I would have thought. Here we have Léonard Massine dancing classical ballet. He was trained in the ballet of Imperial Russia. Now, this time, Diaghilev is going to go one step further, and I think this is what is so interesting about Diaghilev. He never rests on his laurels. He always is moving forward, this restlessness, this creativity, bringing in other people of the avant-garde. And this time with Parade, he is going to work with Picasso, Eric Satie for music, Matisse, a new choreographer, and a play by Jean Cocteau. Now, I don't know whether any of you know the work of Cocteau. Do you know these sorts of paintings that he has? He's sort of one of these people who was a great writer. Well, not a great writer. He wrote a number of things. He also produced a number of films. Another one of his lovers, Cocteau's lovers, was Jean Marais, the most important film star of this era. And they're very strange films, slightly surrealist films. But he's sort of in the background of all of this creative crowd. They all are linked by Cocteau, of course, who was gay and probably also had a liaison with Diaghilev. But what is important is that people as unusual and people who have so little in common as Cocteau, who's an effete, strange person whom they actually thought also had belonged to one of these extraordinary mystical brotherhoods, manages to cooperate with someone like Picasso, who was extremely different in temperament and ideas, and also with Stravinsky. Now, so you get this unusual combination of people. This lady here is Picasso's first wife, Olga Koklova, who was a member of the Ballets Russes and who he meets. Picasso has already met, I suppose, by the time he's going to collaborate with Parade. So Parade then has the sets by Picasso, and it's the story of a sort of a vaudeville troupe. You have a magician who is going to make it all magical. You've got the little girl, American girl, who is based on the character of Mary Pickford, is that right? Yes. And two acrobats. And so Picasso influenced Cocteau in the libretto, if you would call it that, or the script. And you have the themes that you always find with Picasso, the theme of the travelling performers. You know, in his acrobats, in his early era, he paints a lot of acrobats. Also the idea of the artist as outsider, and this idea of the union of high art and folk art, or low art, so as to speak. So Picasso does the sets in a cubist style. Here you have the stage managers, which are made out of cardboard, which was pretty hard to dance in that sort of thing, so you get very stiff movement. So this, of course, is the skyscrapers, which references America, and here you have the French boulevards. This is the French manager here. Now, the music is by Satie. Now, Satie you probably know of in connection with the Black Cat, Le Chat Noir, and is recognised by Diaghilev. And in this particular parade, he actually brings in modern sounds, the sounds of modernity. So he's taken up this idea of the dissonances of Stravinsky. He's gone away from melody, from harmony, just the way the dance choreography has gone away from harmony and graciousness. All right, so the music is this modern, discordant music, and he has things like a typewriter in the background, and the clink of milk bottles and the tooting of horns. Now, this idea of the cacophony of modernity. So this is this extraordinary grouping together of these two. Now, I just want you to look at the choreography of the magician. So again, this is not Nijinsky's choreography, but you can see the influence, can't you? The geometric, contained structure of the dance. Now, moving on, I just had two more ballets to look at. Moving on from there, Diaghilev has now worked with Picasso, who, of course, is the master of the avant-garde. And so by employing the avant-garde in literature and in art, he is sure that his Ballets Russes is going to be at the cutting edge of artistic creation. But the other great artist who is working at the time is, of course, Matisse. And Stravinsky and Diaghilev go to Matisse and ask him if he will design the sets and costumes for the Song of the Nightingale. And Matisse takes a bit of convincing, but finally accepts and immediately regrets it. And he actually says, in a letter to his wife, he says, "You've no idea what Diaghilev, this man, is like. He's like a snake. He's so slippery. You think you have him, but he's slipped through your fingers. He is a charmer." And as we said, he would charm a corpse. So he's managed to get pull Matisse into his orbit. And Matisse will design these amazing costumes for the Song of the Nightingale, which is the story of a dying mandarin who is brought back to life by the song of a bird that he hears singing. Now, Matisse, those of you who've been to the chapel at Vence, you'll see that towards the end of his life, this is how Matisse works with these vibrant sort of geometric shapes. This is the mourning courtiers, and this is the mandarin's costume. Now, Matisse saw this as a chance to actually have his paintings come alive. In other words, to add movement to his design. Now, he and Diaghilev argued about absolutely everything. They argued about pay, they argued about the colours, they argued about the dancers, they argued about the sets. It was a fairly unhappy collaboration, but in the end Matisse felt that it had been worthwhile. I just want to show you a clip of this. This is a little bit dark. Now you see the movements work very, very well with the costumes. It's almost like a Matisse painting coming to life. Now we have the Nightingale. Again, working on the classical technique, but incorporating those sort of geometric movements that you had seen with Nijinsky. Well, we now come to, I think this was about 1910, and one of the very last Diaghilev's ballets is going to be the Blue Train. Now, the Blue Train was a train which had been created to go or take tourists from Paris down to the Côte d'Azur, all right, down to the Riviera. In other words, it was a train for people who were going down to have holidays, the leisured classes, all right, and it meant there was a change very much in the way in which people looked. I mean, before you, as we saw with women, the whiter your skin was, the more you belonged to a wealthy, affluent class. It was only the people out in the sun who were poor. Now, the idea of having a suntan meant that you had actually been to the Côte d'Azur, so therefore the whole idea of the skin and the very easy clothes has been reversed. All right, so the wealthy now go down to the Riviera. This is a restaurant in the Gare de Lyon called the Blue Train because it was where the train left from. Now, Nijinsky can no longer work as a choreographer, and his devoted sister, who used to work with him as a prima ballerina, now steps in and becomes a choreographer for Diaghilev. And she also will dance in this, and the costumes will be designed by Coco Chanel. All right, so again, these people, absolutely cutting edge, are drawn into it. Now, what Coco Chanel, of course, is famous for is for this garçon look. In other words, she's going to introduce traditionally masculine clothes for a female body. Therefore, she's going to have to do away with the corset, and you're going to have long, fluid lines, which emphasise the suppleness of the female body, which has been already introduced with those dances from Scheherazade. She also, of course, uses materials which traditionally had been tied to masculine sportswear or underwear and makes them as outer garments for women. So you get jersey, which falls nicely, and so on. And so these are the bathing suits of the time, and her designs are taken up by the Ballets Russes as costumes. Now, she was engaged also by the Americans after this to go and work on cinema over in Hollywood, and they just didn't like her to work at all. She came back not with the tail between her legs, but saying rather not very complimentary things about the Americans' taste. All right, now I just want to show you an excerpt here. The movements here are taken from current sports. Can you see these people swimming in the background, and people also are sort of doing gymnastics in a vaguely cubist set. Now, Picasso also collaborates with this, but only with a curtain where he has these two rather opulent ladies, very unlike the ladies who are in the ballet, who are running along a beach. And it's a tongue-in-cheek sort of reference to these androgynous figures of women. And here he's got these extremely sort of buxom ladies, so there was a kind of tongue-in-cheek reference. Now, the last ballet that I want to look at with you sees Diaghilev continue to push creativity to different boundaries. And now he works with another painter who is usually associated with the Surrealist movement, Giorgio de Chirico. I don't know whether you know his work. Most of his paintings lure you into a space that you think is a logical space, because you think you're going into a normal space because of these lines. They're going to end up at a particular vanishing point. But the illusion of this security is, of course, disrupted when you actually get to where the vanishing point is, and it doesn't vanish at all. There's something completely exceptional in the opening. So what you have here then are these vanishing points there, but you've actually now got the cornices coming towards you. So it's a really slightly, you feel actually slightly seasick, and you are quite disturbed in this space. He always has broken classical remnants, broken columns, strange arches that don't fit in at all, and there's always some kind of mysterious train or something in the background, often shadows that are going the wrong way, to give you this feeling of being in a disquieting world. So de Chirico then is going to do the sets for the this ballet, and the costumes as well. And in the costumes of the performers, he continues this unreal idea of, where does the material world end and the human world start? In other words, if you look at the costumes here, they're made to look as though they're columns, and here you've got bricks, so you couldn't really tell whether the sets had sort of come to life, or whether the dancers had become bricks. There's this kind of osmosis between the human forms and the set itself. And this was another story, a very complex story of betrayal and so on, not unlike many of the stories of his ballets. Here again you see these broken columns here as a kind of waistcoat. Now, Diaghilev was by now a very, very sick man. There would be one last ballet called The Prodigal Son, where he calls on yet another avant-garde painter, Georges Rouault, to do the sets. And there's, again, extraordinary energetic dancing as well. But it will probably be the last of his collaborations. And he goes to Venice at the age of 57 with his latest lover. Now, he had, as you know, we've gone from Nijinsky to Matisse. Matisse is finally dismissed because he has an affair with another member of the Ballets Russes. And so the last of Diaghilev's lovers is Serge Diaghilev, who is also a lead dancer, and after the death of Diaghilev will go on to be a choreographer with the New York Ballet Company, I think. All right, so he dies in Venice. Why does he go to Venice? It's a return in many ways to his interest in Wagner, which he had felt for the first time when he was in St. Petersburg. Wagner's idea of the total work of art. And of course Wagner dies in Venice. So Diaghilev goes there for his last days, and in his lucid moments he sings arias from the Wagnerian opera. And the people who are there to support him through this difficult time are Coco Chanel, Monsieur Serge, who we saw before, and his lover Liffard. So he dies in Venice, and in fact is buried in San Michele, where Rimsky-Korsakoff is as well. So, how does all this fit in with this story that I've been telling you over 3 sessions about the development of women's clothes? Well, I think you can see in terms of ballet the extraordinary evolution in probably about 20 years away from this tight clothes, the tight choreography, to free music, free choreography, free-flowing clothes. And the clothes that are worn by the Ballets Russes and their fluidity and their style will of course have been championed by Poiret and by Coco Chanel. And so in many ways they are going to liberate the female form, particularly the central part. And last week we looked at men in black. Well, after Coco Chanel, we have women in black. I think we've all looked for that little black dress, which is supposed to be always just there, beckoning to us at some time in our life. I haven't found it yet, but I have not given up. But you have a look at the silhouette of this new woman, which is so different from the Empress Eugénie, whom we saw in the first slide. We now have a woman whose body is free, who has a sort of, whose body is able to move. And I really think that this is the epitome of chic, this particular dress. Coco Chanel says, you know, you can always be overdressed, but you can never be over-elegant. Anyway, well, this is in many ways, I think, the way in which I'd like to finish this series. So thank you very much.